A paradise island is not meant for lost souls. But sometimes, the brilliant light of the Mediterranean hides the ghosts lurking right beneath our feet. Have you ever wondered how thin the line is between a fateful adventure and a bottomless abyss? Why would a young woman, usually cautious and always in touch with her loved ones, agree to get on a stranger's motorcycle in the dead of night? What truly happened during that 90-minute silence when her last messages were desperate pleas for help sent from an unknown coordinate? And more importantly, what terrifying secret was hidden behind the scratches on the suspect's arms? Scratches he desperately blamed on an accident that never happened. Before we dive deep into the journey of stripping away the dark corners of this case, if you are passionate about seeking the truth behind shocking criminal files, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications now. Don't forget to leave a like so we can illuminate the hidden corners of justice together. Your support is the motivation to bring buried truths to light. Now, let us return to the island of Kos, where the nightmare began. Anastasia Patricia Rubinska was no ordinary tourist visiting Greece for luxury. At 27, the girl from Wrocław, Poland, carried the blood of a true traveler, a soul craving experience and freedom. With her blonde hair and ambitious eyes, Anastasia wanted to prove her life wouldn't fade away in a dull office. She dreamed of the catwalk and tried her hand at modeling, but ultimately, the call of new lands led her and her long-term boyfriend, Michal, on an 8-year transcontinental journey. They traveled through the Netherlands, France, and Portugal, working various jobs from serving to manual labor to save for a brighter future in Barcelona. In May 2023, the couple arrived on the island of Kos, a Greek gem, with plans to work at a luxury 5-star hotel in Marmari. For them, this was the final stop to save enough for a dream wedding. But fate dealt a cruel hand on June 12, 2023. A painful cooking oil burn while working at the hotel restaurant left Anastasia exhausted and in pain. She couldn't finish her shift and decided to leave early to relax. Michal stayed behind to complete his work. Around 7:30 p.m. that evening, Anastasia left her room with a simple intention: to buy a bottle of wine to soothe her pain and enjoy the cool island night air. She stopped at a small supermarket, bought wine, and sat on a stone ledge in front of the shop. In an environment considered one of the safest, where crime is almost a foreign concept, Anastasia had no reason to fear. However, the arrival of a group of strange men began to change the atmosphere around her. At 8:30 p.m., she messaged Michal about the presence of these men. She claimed she was fine, but the alcohol began to loosen her resolve. Michal felt the instability in her voice through the texts. He urged her to return to the room, but Anastasia decided to stay a bit longer. By 10 p.m., the story shifted into a phase of extreme tension. Michal received a brief but terrifying message. Anastasia said she did not feel safe. She attached a GPS coordinate, a silent plea for help, and asked him to pick her up immediately. But just minutes later, another message arrived to reassure him. She said she had found an acquaintance from a few days prior who had a motorcycle and would take her back to the hotel faster. That was the last time the signal from Anastasia's phone was active. When Michal finished his shift and rushed to the GPS location, he found only a silent, gloomy void. No Anastasia, no group of men, and no motorcycle. His calls rang into a hollow voicemail. The sudden disappearance of the young woman on a tiny island triggered a massive search, where every tiny clue led toward truths no one wanted to face. Local police were initially indifferent, assuming it was just a tourist who had overindulged. But Michal knew her better than anyone. Anastasia never disappeared without a reason. On the morning of June 13th, a discarded phone was found in an abandoned building. The SIM card was removed, data was wiped, and the GPS had been professionally disabled. This was no longer a standard missing persons case. This was a calculated setup. Someone had intentionally erased her digital footprint. And when the security footage was extracted, the image of Anastasia sitting on the back of a stranger's motorcycle, heading in the opposite direction of her hotel, became the first piece of smoking gun evidence. The man driving that motorcycle was Salahuddin, a 32-year-old Bangladeshi citizen who had lived and worked on the island for years. When police stormed his apartment, they found not only clumsy lies, but undeniable traces. A strand of blonde hair caught in the corner of the room, and bloody scratches on his body. The hallmark of a life-and-death struggle that took place in the dark. Anastasia's silence on that fateful night was not the silence of sleep. It was the silence of a trap that had snapped shut. As the sun rose on June 13, 2023, the peaceful island of Kos became the epicenter of a breathless hunt for clues. Michal, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night, could never have imagined that the GPS coordinates his girlfriend sent would be the key to a labyrinth of lies. Local detectives immediately changed their tune after hearing about the phone found in the abandoned building. A modern phone, well-maintained, now sat with an empty SIM slot and a systematically wiped memory. This was the work of someone with technical investigative knowledge, someone wanting to sever all ties between the victim and the outside world. But the perpetrator made a fatal error. He could not erase what the street security cameras had captured. Footage from cameras near the supermarket began to piece together like a slow-motion horror film. We see Anastasia, staggering from the effects of alcohol and perhaps other substances, climbing onto Salahuddin's motorcycle. Most telling was the direction of travel. Instead of turning left toward the hotel, the man accelerated to the right, heading straight for the remote farmland on the eastern side of the island, where streetlights fade and only the sound of waves hitting dry cliffs remains. When Salahuddin was summoned to the station, he maintained a strangely calm demeanor. With his short hair and the look of a humble laborer, he tried to construct a reluctant hero narrative. He claimed he saw the young woman having trouble with other men and only wanted to help her home. He swore he dropped her off near the hotel and had no idea what happened next. However, when investigators asked him to remove his jacket, the truth began to emerge under the cold neon lights of the interrogation room. On Salahuddin's hands and neck were vertical scratches, red and still weeping blood. These were not injuries from a motorcycle fall, as he claimed, as his bike didn't have a single scratch. These marks were characteristic of female fingernails, a final effort, a desperate resistance from a victim backed into a corner. At this point, legal experts began to suspect the worst. An emergency search warrant for Salahuddin's apartment was issued immediately. The cramped apartment he shared with a Pakistani roommate became the most critical scene. There, Anastasia's presence was no longer speculation. A long, blonde strand of hair was caught in the bed frame. Tiny blood spatters on a wooden cabinet were discovered under UV light. Most notably, police found a set of Salahuddin's clothes, still damp in the laundry basket, with dark brown stains the washing machine hadn't managed to erase. DNA test results later confirmed it was Anastasia's blood. The unraveling of Salahuddin's lies became even more dramatic when police discovered another vital piece of digital evidence. In his phone's search history from the early hours of June 13th, haunting keywords appeared. How to delete GPS data, how to disappear without a trace, and cheap flights to Italy. Just hours after Anastasia disappeared, this killer had hurried to book a one-way flight out of Greece, He had no intention of staying to help search for the friend he claimed to have helped. He was preparing for a cross-border escape. Meanwhile, at the apartment, investigators found a chilling detail. A large plastic bag and lengths of rope were carelessly tossed in a storage corner. The smell of death began to permeate the air. Salahuddin began to lose his composure, constantly changing his story. From saying they only talked, to admitting to sexual contact but claiming it was consensual. However, the injuries on his body and the evidence at the scene told a different story. A story of coercion and a brutal attack on a girl in a defenseless state. Despite Salahuddin's arrest, Anastasia's whereabouts remained a mystery. Search teams and canine units were mobilized to scour thickets and abandoned houses around the last GPS signal. Everyone still hoped for a miracle, that she was just being held somewhere. But as time passed, that hope grew thin like morning mist. The stripping away of secrets was about to lead us to a remote wetland, where human cruelty was exposed in its rawest form. The killer remained silent about the victim's location, but traces from the motorcycle and mobile tower pings pointed to a mangrove area not far from his apartment. This was an area he frequently visited for farm work. Here, the final layer of the secret was about to be peeled back, and it would shake the entire island of Kos due to the sheer malice of a man who called himself a helper. As the sun reached its zenith on the 6th day of the search, hope of finding Anastasia alive flickered out. In the apartment, Salahuddin remained sullen with his contradictory statements, but outside, hundreds of volunteers and canines were closing in on a remote wetland in Alix. This was a salt marsh area with dense bushes and deep mud, a place local residents rarely set foot in after dark. It was here, under a large tree covered by dry branches and black plastic bags, that the smell of death guided the rescue team. When the camouflage was pushed aside, a horrific sight met the witnesses. Anastasia lay there, breathless, having been brutally violated. Her body bound tight with ropes identical to those found in the Bangladeshi man's apartment. Her throat had been constricted, a clear sign of murder by strangulation, a ruthless act to silence her final cries for help. The forensic evidence process was immediately deployed under the strict supervision of experts from Athens. Medical examiners confirmed that the victim had been subjected to extreme violence before her last breath. Bruises on her neck and body indicated a lopsided struggle between a young woman, intoxicated, burned, and vulnerable, and a strong, predatory man. Most infuriatingly, the killer had intentionally mutilated her fingertips to prevent fingerprint identification and to erase any of his DNA that might have been trapped under her nails as she fought back. This was no longer manslaughter or an accident. This was an act of murder with premeditation. Salahuddin did not take her to the hotel as promised. He took her to his apartment, exploited her disorientation to commit a vile act, and then took her to the wetlands to end her life and silence the witness. His removal of the SIM card, the data wipe, and the intentional disposal of the body in a hard-to-find location displayed a chillingly calm criminal mindset. Immediately after the body was found, prosecutors officially issued a heavy indictment against Salahuddin. He was no longer just a suspect for kidnapping or disappearance. He now faced charges of rape and first-degree murder. The evidence gathered at the apartment, including blood on his clothes and Anastasia's hair, formed an undeniable chain of truth. Despite the powerful circumstantial evidence, the man stubbornly denied all charges. He cried, claimed he was being framed, blamed his roommates, and even blamed the victim. But the scratches on his face, The marks of justice left by Anastasia told a different story. Each scar on his flesh was a silent accusation of the Polish girl's agonizing final moments. The investigation also expanded to Salahuddin's Pakistani roommate. Detectives suspected he might have assisted in disposing of the body, or at least witnessed the event without reporting it. The complexity of the case lay not just in the murder, but in how the killer used his knowledge of the Kos terrain to hide the body. He chose an area where the tide could rise and fall, hoping the water would wash away any remaining biological traces. However, his sophistication was no match for the persistence of the investigators. Maintaining a strict chain of custody from the wetlands to the laboratory allowed police to preserve precious biological samples. DNA found under the victim's remaining nails perfectly matched Salahuddin's genetic profile. At that point, every exit for him was sealed shut. Before entering the fateful trial, the killer's psyche began to reveal even darker corners. He showed no remorse or grief. Instead, he was only concerned with being extradited to his home country or reducing his sentence. This coldness sparked outrage in Poland and Greece. Protests demanding justice for Anastasia erupted everywhere, turning the case into a tense diplomatic issue between the two nations. Anastasia's story is more than a standard murder case. It is a painful lesson about misplaced trust and the ghosts lurking behind the friendly masks of strangers. As we approach the final verdict, the truth about the monster hiding in the guise of a humble laborer will be fully exposed, leaving a haunting echo about the value of life and justice in this world. The trial took place in an atmosphere thick with the combined fury of Polish and Greek citizens. Every eye was fixed on the man huddled in the dock, still clinging to fragmented explanations of his innocence. However, faced with a mountain of biological evidence and undeniable digital data, Salahuddin's efforts were futile. After hours of tense deliberation, the judge handed down the maximum penalty: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the crimes of murder and brutal rape. This spiritual death sentence marked the end of any hope for the killer's escape. Following the verdict, his demeanor shifted visibly. No longer appearing timid or shedding crocodile tears, he revealed his cold-blooded nature with a murky gaze and a terrifying silence. He walked out of the courtroom under police escort, leaving behind the inconsolable grief of the victim's family. Looking deep into his behavior, we see a typical psychological escalation of a predator. He didn't pick Anastasia at random. He had observed her, recognizing her vulnerability while she was injured and intoxicated. His calm disposal of the body, the wiping of the phone, and the booking of a flight that very night displayed an extreme rational calculation. His actions were not a momentary outburst, but the result of a desire for absolute control and dominance over another life. He enjoyed the feeling of holding the power of life and death, treating the theft of another's life as a way to affirm his morbid ego. His cruelty was further displayed in his intentional mutilation of the victim to hide her identity. This act was not just to evade the police. It reflected a total lack of empathy and respect for human beings. The sentence is a late comfort to Anastasia's family, but it cannot fill the void left by the young woman. The case is closed, but questions about the safety of young people embarking on journeys to strange lands remain. Anastasia passed away at 27, taking with her dreams of a wedding and a home in Barcelona. Her death is a painful reminder of the dark corners that exist even in lands considered tourist heavens. How many killers like him are still hiding under the mask of ordinary workers, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike? The truth has been exposed. Justice has named the sinner, but the haunting memory of Anastasia's final 90 minutes in his hands will remain in the hearts of those left behind. We see here a breakdown of trust between humans, where an act of perceived help was the beginning of an unforgivable crime. Will the island of Kos ever be as peaceful as before? Or every night, will the sound of waves hitting the cliffs serve as a reminder of the desperate cries of a soul that now rests forever in a cold wetland? Anastasia's story is not just a criminal file. It is a wake-up call about vigilance and the value of life. Justice may have been executed on paper, but the moral echo and the lingering sorrow for a life taken too soon will always be a scar that never heals in the social consciousness.